Dale Earnhardt passed away tonight, 21 years ago, under an extraordinary set of circumstances. He had no fear. He could not be stopped. The Intimidator was him. However, millions were left in shock when Dale Earnhardt's final race ended in a collision that was so unexpected and deceptively straightforward on a sunny February afternoon in 2001. No one considered that crash to be a failure when it occurred. Some of the people were in tears. Then word spread around the world that Dale Earnhardt was actually dead. It appeared to the outside world to be a small bump on the wall. But you'll be shivering from what actually transpired inside that black automobile. This is not merely a crash story. It's the horrifying reality that NASCAR was unaware of. The last lap, tragically. February 18, 2001 was the date. Excitement was in the air at Daytona International Speedway. In anticipation of the storied Daytona 500, the largest race in NASCAR, about 200,000 spectators crowded the stands. The cars reached heart-pounding speeds, averaging 162 mph, and the engines boomed like thunder. There was an electric tension. The Daytona 500 was more than just a race, as the fans were aware. It was a risky, skillful, and fast-paced battlefield. And they were going to see one of the most tragic and iconic events in racing history that day. Millions of people know Dale Earnhardt Sr. as the Intimidator, and he was driving his iconic black No. 3 Chevrolet. He was one of the most daring drivers in NASCAR, and a 7-time champion. He wasn't racing to win, though, on this particular day. He adopted a new role instead. He served as the Guardian. Earnhardt had dropped to third place in the last few laps of the race, trailing only 2 vehicles from his own team, Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Michael Waltrip, in vehicle number 15. Car number 8 is being driven by his son. Throughout his NASCAR Cup Series career, Waltrip had never taken home a victory. Jr., who is still young but has a lot of potential, had the opportunity to honor his father. Dale Sr. made a choice that would demonstrate his love and dedication. In order to give his 2 drivers the best chance of finishing first and second, he decided to stay back and block the other competitors. The vehicles were closely clustered on the high-banked bends of the Daytona Oval. As the race neared its last lap, every driver was pushing themselves to the edge, creating a tense atmosphere. Earnhardt remained low, maintaining his position and repelling backward challenges. Number 40 and Sterling Marlin Silver. Dodge crept closer, looking for a gap. Another experienced driver, Ken Schrader, was hiding close by, waiting for an error. Then the event that rocked the racing world to its foundation arrived. A surprise that nobody anticipated. The frightful impact moment. At almost 160 mph, even a slight contact may be fatal. Earnhardt's vehicle squirms wildly. The tires lost their traction when the rear snapped loose. He was sideways in a second. Across the track, his automobile veered down and then abruptly jerked back up. The audience let out a gasp. The threat was obvious. Ken Schrader's yellow automobile pulled up next to Earnhardt's at the same time. There was no time for Schrader to respond. Schrader's equipment struck Earnhardt's spinning vehicle. There was a horrifying crunch as the 2 automobiles collided. Both cars were hurled toward the exterior wall by the power of the impact. Even seasoned fans were taken aback by the crash's severity. At a speed of about 157 miles per hour, Earnhardt's vehicle struck the wall at a severe angle, estimated to be between 55 and 59. Few people were able to survive the hit. As metal shrieked and sparks flew, the car's front crumpled and folded in. It had the kind of effect that makes people quiet. Schrader's vehicle rolled to a halt after bouncing off. He clambered out and staggered in the direction of Earnhardt's wreck. For years, the 2 had competed in races together. Schrader was aware of a problem. The automobile with the number 3 was still, not a trace of life. Schrader looked inside and turned away at once. The story was in his face. He frantically waved for assistance. Within seconds, emergency personnel arrived on the scene. Their faces taut with terror and concentration. They worked rapidly as they surrounded the car. They attempted to open the door, but it was too badly damaged. They brought in tools. To keep cameras from seeing, sheets were raised. Sensing the gravity of the situation, the crowd silently watched. Confusion gave way to concern on pit road. Dale Earnhardt Jr. was celebrating with his team after finishing second. After years of hardship, Michael Waltrip had just won his first race in the NASCAR Cup Series. However, once word got out, the festivities slowed. Dale Sr. was not feeling well. The racing world came to a halt when the news was eventually announced. The roughest driver on the circuit, Dale Earnhardt, often known as the Intimidator, was no longer there. The weight of 1,000 wrecks fell upon his death. Fans sobbed aloud. Broadcasters found it difficult to talk. Colleagues were stunned. The manner in which it occurred made it even more difficult. He hadn't been a careless driver. He hadn't gambled for the victory. He was just doing what he had been doing for years, holding his ground and protecting his team. The horrific angle of impact, Marlin's contact, and Schrader's second hit had all come together in the worst way. The history of NASCAR changed dramatically as a result of this tragic incident. Officials and engineers started posing challenging queries. How might a seemingly innocuous collision result in the sudden death of a person? How might it be prevented from occurring again? The crash was never forgotten by those who witnessed it that day. There was more to it than the sound or sight of metal hitting metal. It was the ensuing abrupt silence. The way the audience lost faith and the way the applause ceased. In a matter of seconds, the terrible impact was over. However, its shadow would extend well beyond that last lap. Everything altered as a result. Everyone was reminded of how hazy the boundary is between tragedy and speed. The crowd was not the only one stunned by this fatal collision. It brought up important issues about vehicle dynamics and the racing industry's safety regulations. Vehicle dynamics and lethal forces. The hood's fastening pins broke away at the point of impact. The hood shot upward and started repeatedly banging into the windshield. Every blow reverberated like thunder. As the hood flailed madly and the front of the automobile crushed, fans stared in horror. On the grassy infield, the automobile tumbled to a stop after skidding down from the wall. The number 3 appeared to have lost the race. How much had changed in that moment was unknown to anyone yet. Emergency personnel hurried to the location. They started chopping away pieces of the wreck after encircling the number 3. Dale Earnhardt was still inside. There was no indication of life or movement. Although the teams reacted swiftly, the harm was already done. The base of his skull was shattered from the severe deceleration. There was nowhere else for the crash's energy to go. It had all been swallowed by his body in a moment of devastation. Within the hospital facility, physicians tried everything. They fought against nature, against hope, and against time. However, the result was obvious. Dale Earnhardt had died instantly in the crash. More than a racer had been lost at the impact moment. A legend, a leader, and a father had been lost. The word got out fast. Reporters' voices were shattered when they made the announcement. Fans at home and in the stands were in disbelief. Crash scenes were nothing new to them. However, nobody anticipated this. Not Earnhardt. Not the man who was now NASCAR's spokesperson. This was the first time he had turned his back on so many near misses. And the movement delay that lasted less than a blink were all contributing factors. Not a single error. When combined, they set off a domino effect that was impossible to reverse. Dale Earnhardt's fate permanently altered the sport. Safety regulations were revised. Automobile designs were enhanced. New tools and protocols were developed as a result of the shock of that crash. Years later, however, the memory still endures. Not only is that horrific impact remembered for its intensity, but also for its significance. Time stopped, the sound died away, and one of the biggest names in racing was mute. Let's examine what actually transpired in the aftermath, and how it permanently altered the course of racing. The accident's aftermath. The first person to arrive at the wreck was Ken Schrader. In an attempt to communicate with Earnhardt, he leaned into the cockpit, but there was no sound, no movement, and no life. His body momentarily froze. Then he turned and started furiously waving to the rescue personnel and track officials without saying a word. It was a forceful, quick, and urgent gesture. It was an indication that something was seriously off. "I knew he was dead," Schrader would later recall quietly of that moment. The safety team showed up in a matter of seconds. They advanced quickly, encircling the twisted vehicle and starting to work right away. The vehicle's front end sustained significant damage. The windshield was broken, the front end was crushed, and the hood was torn loose. Tools were brought in by rescuers to cut through the debris. They worked fast but carefully. Time was of the essence. Dale Earnhardt was inside, still as stone. He was eventually taken from the wreck and put on a stretcher by the personnel. As they moved him to an ambulance, paramedics did so deliberately. With lights blazing, the car sped out from the speedway, transporting Earnhardt to Halifax Medical Center, which is only a short distance from the track. Reporters gathered close to the medical facility. The news was broadcast nationwide by television crews. During live broadcasts, commentators broke down. At home, fans sat still. This went beyond simply losing a driver. It was a symbol that was lost. There had been more to Dale Earnhardt than victories and titles. He had been the sport's lifeblood. Racing was more than just a job to Dale. He lived it. He had learned every sound and scent of the sport from his upbringing around garages and racetracks. Ralph Nard, his father, was also a racer, and Dale proudly and resolutely followed his own path. With little more than his enthusiasm and a strong determination to succeed, he had left high school to pursue his ambition. He had earned his reputation by working hard and driving without fear. He worked hard in addition to having talent to become a champion. He got famous for his style, automobile, and number. His admirers adored him. His rivals held him in high regard. There had always been a sense of risk and thrill when he was at the track. He raced like he lived, swiftly, fearlessly, and authentically. And he was gone now. The next day saw an influx of tributes. There were flowers by the track. Signs and walls were covered with messages. Teams, drivers, and supporters united in sorrow. Officials from NASCAR discussed his legacy. His grin, his humor, and his intense passion for racing were recalled by friends. After that day, there was less noise in the garage. Regular racing would never be resumed by the black number vehicle. There was an unfillable void left by the guy who had made it renowned. But his soul was still there. His memory was conveyed by every engine roar and every curve of the track. Racing had been Dale Nard's life. He sacrificed everything for it, including his life at the end. Driving with all of his heart, protecting his team, and defending his position were the things he loved most in his last moments. The accident's aftermath permanently altered the sport. However, it also brought back memories of why everyone adored it. For the bravery, the enthusiasm, and the individuals like Dale who put their all into it. Not for the awards or the recognition. A deeper question started to surface above the sadness. What specifically led to the crash's death? The whole motorsport community was rocked by the stunning results of the autopsy report, which was eagerly anticipated by everybody. Results of the autopsy and seatbelt use. Although the crash appeared forceful, it was not out of the ordinary by NASCAR standards. Even worse-looking collisions had occurred in which the drivers fled unscathed. Dale Earnhardt, however, did not live. Determining the answer, investigators started looking into every aspect of the collision. The truth might help avert another catastrophe, but it wouldn't bring him back. The official cause of death, as determined by the autopsy, was a basilar skull fracture. A violent and abrupt hit to the head resulted in a fracture near the base of the skull. It had been impossible to survive because the trauma had happened so fast and so intensely. According to experts, the damage occurred moments after the automobile struck the wall, and the fracture was caused by blunt force. Additional parts of the picture emerged as medical professionals and safety officials examined the wreckage and the data. The information on the seatbelt was among the most alarming. Nard was wearing his safety harness like he was supposed to, but during the collision, something went wrong. The seatbelt was found to have malfunctioned during the collision. The belt had dumped, but not ripped all the way. That phrase referred to a rapid release of tension, in which the body was able to go too far forward, due to a belt shift or break at a crucial moment. The belt's installation and positioning were the cause of the failure. According to some experts, it was mounted a little differently than was advised. This discrepancy put strain on specific belt components, causing the forces to tear it apart during the violent halt. Nard's body rushed forward as the belt relaxed. The complete energy of the fall was absorbed by his neck, and his head and chest slid ahead of his shoulders. A perfect storm was generated by the collision's speed and the seat belt malfunction. Nard's body was left exposed in those last minutes, and the outcome was disastrous. Investigators also noted that a head and neck restraint system was absent from the vehicle on that particular day. Drivers had access to devices such as the head and neck support device, which was already under development. However, many in the sport had not yet embraced them in 2001. Nard was among the drivers who thought the gadgets were uncomfortable or limited their freedom of movement and turning within the vehicle. The purpose of the Hans device was to prevent the driver's head from jerking forward during an accident. It helped the head and body move in unison by attaching to the helmet and connecting to the shoulders. When the body was abruptly flung forward without it, the neck took the brunt of the force. That pressure had been sufficient in Nard's situation to result in a lethal injury. More challenging questions were highlighted by the fact that Nard had not been utilizing a Hans device. Was he saved by it? Would better equipment have allowed survivors to survive the crash? Although safety engineers were unable to confirm, many thought it might have had an impact. Emotions were running high when these details were made public. Fans, who were still in mourning, now encountered annoyance and perplexity. How could one of the most well-known figures in sports be killed in an apparent preventable collision? Drivers raised their voices. Some acknowledged that they had previously objected to wearing head restraints. Others had instant change of heart. NASCAR moved swiftly. In a few months, head and neck restraints were required. Systems for seatbelts were reassessed. Installation and placement guidelines were strengthened. New studies on impact protection, helmet designs, and cockpit safety were initiated. The sport refused to let another star fall, the same way it had lost one of its best. In hindsight, the collision was more than a sad event. It was a pivotal moment. The entire racing community was obliged to examine its own standards after Dale Earnhardt passed away. It demonstrated that even the most capable and powerful drivers could be at risk. It demonstrated that one should never take safety for granted. The autopsy results and the seatbelt break revealed a harsh reality. Neither a lack of skill nor a careless choice led to Dale Earnhardt's demise. It was caused by minor errors in a system that was still lagging behind the sport's pace. But change resulted from that loss. Progress resulted from that suffering. Dale Earnhardt had never been content to settle for less. He raced fearlessly in life. He imparted one of racing's most potent lessons in his death, that no driver, regardless of skill, is immune to danger, and that there must always be a fight for safety. The sport had long focused on quickness, cunning, and bold maneuvers. However, the topic of discussion had shifted. It was no longer possible to consider safety to be merely another task on a checklist. It was obvious that something needed to be corrected, since something had gone horribly wrong. The rippling effect and quick safety changes. NASCAR started an internal crash inquiry right away. They were interested in every aspect. Every moment of the mishap was dissected. The video was examined by engineers and safety specialists. They examined the impact angle. They looked at Earnhardt's car's damage. Above all, they examined the digital information gathered from within the car throughout the race, known as the telemetry. Telemetry provided information on the vehicle's speed, steering action, and braking response. Every action and every input second was mapped out like a digital breadcrumb trail. In order to find trends and hints that could help explain why Earnhardt did not survive, the researchers compared the data with the impact moment. Analysis of accident tests became a primary concern, along with that digital trail. In test settings, cars were subjected to harsh conditions. Walls slammed into them. In order to learn how they could be made safer, they were purposefully turned, bent, and shattered. Engineers used high-speed cameras and test dummies to repeatedly reproduce the Daytona crash. What the human body went through within the car was what they wanted to see. Drivers, team leaders, and technical personnel attended a safety meeting hosted by NASCAR concurrently. There was no conversation. It was an exhortation. Tradition and chance were no longer viable options for the sport. Changes needed to be made, and they needed to happen now. No fan, team, or driver wished to witness another incident, such to the one that claimed Dale Earnhardt's life. Mandatory use of the Hans device, a head and neck support system that many drivers had previously avoided, was one of the first significant improvements. Every driver in NASCAR's Top Series was obliged to wear it by the beginning of the 2002 season. No exceptions were made. It has been demonstrated that the device prevents the head from whipping forward in collisions. It protected the neck and skull, the most vulnerable areas of a driver's anatomy, and dispersed the power of an accident throughout the body. Furthermore, seat belts were strengthened and modified. A systemic flaw was revealed by the belt failure in Earnhardt's disaster. NASCAR changed the manufacturing, mounting, and positioning of belts to ensure that they could endure the harsh stresses of contemporary racing. Belts were no longer able to move or relax under stress. No matter what, they had to hold. However, the changes did not end with the vehicle. They also went to the tracks. The installation of safety barriers walls that might absorb impact and lessen the forces on a colliding vehicle was one of the most significant improvements. These barriers, in contrast to solid concrete, featured layers of foam and steel that crumpled upon collision, causing the car to slow down gradually. One of the first racetracks to build safer barriers was Daytona International Speedway, where Earnhardt crashed. Others came soon after. They quickly appeared at practically all of the big NASCAR tracks. It was a straightforward concept that had a huge impact. These obstacles prevented fatalities. They decreased injuries. These adjustments had a strong knock-on effect. Other racing series noticed. Local dirt tracks, Formula One, and even Indy cars started to reconsider their safety protocols. What began as a race-specific tragedy grew into a global push for improved safety. It was for the best that racing will never be the same. Dale Earnhardt's legacy started to change. His aggressive driving style, black No. 3 automobile, and unwavering drive to succeed had always been his hallmarks. However, he was now also recognized as the pivotal moment in the history of NASCAR safety. His passing made the sport confront its flaws. It called for advancement. It accomplished the impossibility. Safety was a fundamental component of racing. When new generations of drivers started their careers, without question, they donned the Hans device. Unlike earlier drivers, they had faith in their automobiles, their belts, and their helmets. They competed on courses built to keep them safe, not only to show off their speed. The alterations persisted over the years. The new systems were put to the test with each crash. Fans and drivers were reminded of what had been lost and what had been won with every safe escape from a disaster. Despite the tragic conclusion to his final race, Dale Earnhardt left behind a legacy of life. Drivers now endure accidents that would have otherwise ended their careers, or worse because of him. Fans witnessed their heroes waving to the audience as they emerged from the carnage thanks to him. He made safety the center of racing rather than just its periphery. Daytona was not the end of his story. It endures in every belt, barrier, and driver that gets into a car and speeds toward victory with a bit more protection than the brave and selfless man who cleared the path. Legal disputes to preserve Dale's legacy, privacy, and autopsy. The nation was rocked by Dale Earnhardt's passing. He did more than drive a race car. He was a representation of fortitude, perseverance, and resolve. By driving hard and making bold decisions, he had established a legacy. For decades, Rose had supported him, cheered for his daring maneuvers, worn his number, and seen him influence the sport he loved. It seemed as though time had stopped as word of his unexpected passing spread. The Earnhardt family, however, had to deal with a more agonizing obstacle, while the public celebrated their hero. The revelation of Dale's autopsy photos and documents sparked a commotion in the days after the collision. At the time, those pictures were regarded as public papers under state law. This implied that anyone, including the media, might request and access them. The family was appalled to discover that a number of Florida publications had asked to view the autopsy images. It was a profound violation. They had recently lost a friend, their husband, and their father. They were now being forced to come to terms with the possibility that the world would see the most agonizing pictures of his last moments. Dale's widow, Teresa Earnhardt, moved swiftly. She demanded that the pictures be sealed right away. Still mourning the death of his father, Dale Jr. backed the decision. For the family, concealing the truth was not the goal. It was about preserving the honor of a man who had dedicated his life to his sport. Their goal was to prevent Dale's recollection from turning into a spectacle. A contentious court dispute ensued between the Earnhardt family and media organizations that asserted their right to view the documents. Newspapers claimed they required the images to guarantee the investigation's openness. They asserted that the public had a right to know that the autopsy was conducted correctly. The family countered that the publication of these pictures did nothing but violate privacy and inflict further suffering. There was emotion in the courtrooms. Legal teams argued over ethics and the law. Supporters left comments. Most took the family's side. They felt that rather than being splattered across headlines for dramatic effect, Dale's legacy had to be honored. Lawmakers all throughout the country started to take notice. The Florida legislature intervened as demand mounted. To preserve Dale Earnhardt's autopsy images, a bill was approved. The Earnhardt Family Protection Act was the name given to it. The statute prohibited the general public from viewing autopsy pictures without a judge's approval. It established a new benchmark nationwide, not just in Florida. The Earnhardt case prompted other states to examine their own legislation. This court battle became an additional aspect of Dale's legacy, demonstrating that he continued to have an impact even after his passing. He had never wavered in his convictions. His family had now taken the same action on his behalf. Dale Jr. talked candidly about his father's passing and the conflict that followed years later. He claimed that losing his father had altered him in unexpected ways. It caused him to reflect carefully on faith, life, and the people in his life who were most important. In interviews, he talked about how his sadness had become both a source of growth and a part of who he was. He claimed that his father's memory served as a daily direction for him, as a man and as a driver. Dale Earnhardt's influence remained constant throughout this entire ordeal. Fans continue to speak highly of him. His name is known to kids who have never seen him race. Championships and memorable finishes are not the only aspects of his legacy. It has to do with the safety adjustments made after his passing. It is about his family's tenacity in preserving his memory. It has to do with the more profound ideals he stood for: bravery, devotion, and deference. Now, Dale's tale extends beyond athletics. It is covered in safety conferences, media ethics discussions, and legal schools. His last race signaled the beginning of something greater, rather than its conclusion. Stronger safety regulations, greater privacy rules for bereaved families, and improved protection for athletes were the results. Ultimately, the effort to preserve his autopsy data was more than just a legal one. It was an affirmation of human dignity, a pledge to keep Dale's last moments private, and a commitment to remember him as a hero who spurred change rather than as a tragic figure. Through their bravery and heartache, the Nard family served as a simple yet profound reminder to the world that some legacies are too strong to ever fade, and some memories are too precious to be shared. How do you feel about the horrific crash that claimed Dale Nard's life and the legacy it left behind? Leave a comment with your ideas. Your viewpoint would be greatly appreciated.